I sure love Revit. It does so many great things. It is a terrific building information modeler, or BIM, program. However, one thing it doesn't always do so well is create drawings, perspective views in particular, of our projects that are interesting and dramatic. It has a kind of default setting, which is okay. So the goals of this assignment are to, one, learn how to control Revit views that we create within the program, but also develop good judgment about the composition of those views so that you can make the most compelling and interesting drawings and renderings for your project. So let's start by making a perspective view. I'm going to use the sample project. It's handy because everybody has it on their computers, and you can use your own studio project if you want, or you can use this sample project or any of the sample projects that are available. And of course, if those of you who are using SketchUp, the compositional techniques are the same. The way that you get at them will be slightly different, although interesting enough, a lot of the tools, the names are the same. Anyway, I'm going to create a new perspective view using the camera, as you know, and when we think of where we put the camera, one thing you'll want to ponder is whether or not you want a 1-point or 2-point perspective. Now, how would you know that? Well, first of all, when you plant the camera, you'll see the triangular cone of vision. And if I look at, say, a corner, that's going to be a 2-point perspective. Whereas if I keep the line of sight, this center line of sight, perpendicular to some back wall, that's going to be a 1-point perspective. And again, it depends on what's in the space and how you want to show it. So here's my beautiful 1-point perspective that I set up with a column right in the middle of our face. So I think the first thing I'll do is I'm going to rename this view. Just right-click on the name in the project browser and choose Rename, and I'll just call it the Standard Revit view. Now, in the Standard Revit view, obviously I want to make this a little nicer, and the mission of our assignment here is to modify the view and try and make it look as interesting as possible. Our ally in this is the navigation wheel, and this is over on the right of any three-dimensional view. I have active the full navigational wheel, which is the default, I believe. So when you click on that, you end up with this looks suspiciously like a steering wheel, and you can click and drag on any of these elements. So for example, if I click and drag down, it will walk backwards if it can walk. Obviously, I can walk through walls in Revit because that's allowed. I can also click and drag on the look tool, so maybe I can come up with a better view composition. I can also move up and down. So maybe this is a much more interesting view to kind of show how the spaces connect. And I can also pan over if I'd like to see a little bit more of the kitchen in my project. And our goal here is to try and create a view which is interesting to look at, which kind of shows off your project. You often want to have a balance of ceiling and floor and walls. Now in this case, we have a glass wall on one side. And you also want an eye height which is appealing and is going to show off your interiors. Another little trick that we can do is modify the view by moving the camera in plan view. I'm going to tap WT to put my view into a tiled view. And now with my plan view visible, if I click on the crop region here, in my perspective view, you will see the camera appear mysteriously in plan. And now I can just click and drag on the camera itself. I can also grab the target and modify that. And these can be very interesting views and an interesting way, especially if you have a particular part of the project that you want to show off. You can just drag the camera to make the view visible and show the architectural elements that you want. Another way to make that camera visible, by the way, is to just right-click on the name of the perspective view that you want to see and choose Show Camera from the menu which pops up. And you'll notice that the crop region gets selected automatically when you do this. One other fun thing that you can do here is we can change the focal length. If I call up my steering wheel and click on the little down arrow, you will see that there is an option for increase or decrease focal length. And what this does, if I select this and I drag down, you should see my field of view, that's the triangular shape here, increase. And this is very typical of interiors projects where you do tend to see an awful lot of a space, and it does tend to get distorted, but that's okay because we need to see the floors and the walls and the ceilings. Now this is a fairly big space, but in a smaller room, say a bedroom, you really do need to increase that focal length. When you do that, you can hit escape in your view and get back to the zoom tool, and you can zoom in or out to make the composition acceptable. Again, we're trying to create a perspective view that has a focus on the elements that tell the story of our design. And you can just hit TW to untile the windows. WT is tile, TW is untile, and this will bring it back to the view where you see your perspective. So continuing with our challenge here, I'm going to make a copy of my view that I just created. I'm going to call it on the ground. See how I've done that in my project browser. And you don't need to duplicate with detailing, just duplicate. The detailing is when you have things like dimensions and notes and drafting lines. We don't need any of that. But now your mission is to put the camera on the floor and try to adjust the view so that you can create something very interesting. Now you may have to use a number of different tools, but the up-down tool is the one which will allow us to be on the floor. And I'm going to get as close as I can. If you've ever seen the movie Citizen Kane, this is kind of what it looks like. And now I'm going to use the different tools to try and make a view that's interesting. Your mission is to try to create one that's going to work with this particular project. It might require some unusual types of composition, but I'm going to zoom in. Maybe I'll walk forward here. And then use some of these other tools to get my view so that it's really interesting. And here I think I've decided that I want to show off the almost canyon-like cabinetry in the kitchen. And continuing with our challenge, I made another copy. I copied my previous view, and I've called this one on the ceiling, and I've used my steering wheel to move myself up to the ceiling. Now I'm going to look down onto my space and see if I can compose the view that somehow tells me something different about this space. Now in this case, a part of this project I never really noticed before is how there's kind of quite a bit of space behind this kitchen counter. And so this view kind of shows off that element, which I really didn't notice before. For the next two views, I'm going to start with this standard Revit view. But now what I'm going to do is create a wide angle perspective. And sometimes these can be great perspectives in something like an open office area where you kind of have a vast horizon of interior space. So select the crop region, and up in the toolbar, in the modified toolbar, click Size Crop. And what you'll see is a menu which tells us the default view here, which is 6 inches by 4.5 inches. What we can do, we can just change this number to be a wider view. And you do have to make sure that your field of view is checked here. If you lock the proportions, it will automatically adjust the height based on whatever width you put in. So I'm going to type in 8 for the width and 2 inches for the height and click Apply. And OK. And now you can see that we have a perspective which is much, much wider. And my challenge here is to try and make this look like a nice interior. And we're going to use all of the same tools that we did before. You just have to decide what do you want to show in your particular project. Now for this view, I really like the fact that this is a space with 3 different walls with glass on it. So I've moved my camera over to the other side of the space to get a view of it that is more interesting and kind of tells a different story than my previous views. For you, in your projects, try to keep it to one room if you can, or one space. And if some of you are using something like your office project, by all means, you'll probably have a big open office area. There are quite a few different ways that you can configure that view. The vertically proportioned drawing is created the same way. You click the crop region and change the size crop now to be 8 inches tall by 2 inches wide. This often does one particular thing to your view, which is shows off the connection between elements in the plan and elements in the ceiling. Now, I don't have a particularly interesting ceiling here, but I do have some lighting up in the ceiling here, and I did have some elements in the foreground. So this can make a really interesting kind of view. And again, your challenge is to try to work with the constraints of this proportion to make the most interesting view of your project. Now, for the vignette view, it's an unusual view in that you want to really zoom in on some detail in your project. Now, I just liked that this is a sort of fancy dinner setting here, so I'm going to zoom in on these elements here. Maybe I'll make them shaded so they're a little easier to see. And I happen to know that these render fairly nicely. Again, use any of the tools available to you, including the focal length, looking around, modifying the camera view. But in this case, for the first time, we're going to allow you to freeform adjust the shape of the crop region. So for instance, I'm going to go with something a little more square. The only thing to take note is that when you do modify the crop region on a vignette, we're often making them really small. Go to the size crop menu. But this time, and you see how tiny this is, 1 and 11/16. This makes a difference when you're doing like a test render on your computer. So come back in here and make these 6 inches by 6 inches, or mine, I guess, is ever so slightly not proportioned perfectly as a square. Just to make that work, make sure you've locked the scale. Click apply. Doesn't look any different, but it does mean if you were to drag this onto a sheet that it would match the other sizes. For this next view, we're going to start with a different view now. This is not going to be in perspective, it's going to be in axonometric. And you can get there by clicking the default 3D view, the little house up here. It's also down here in the project browser. And I've opened it up. What I want to do is turn on the section box. And we have actually seen that section box in our previous project. Some of you opted to include it. And here's my section box. I can just click on it, and these draggers, these grips, become visible. And I'm not really interested in all this site information, so I'm going to crop all of that away, at least for today. By the way, if you have a multi-story project, you can crop away the bottom of the project if you don't need to see it. Now, in my case, I'm going to crop away until I remove the roof, and then that will be my axonometric view. And the trick with this sort of view is to show enough wall so that you have a sense of the volume you've created, but drop it down low enough so that you really can see the space. To orbit this view, I could absolutely click and drag on my view cube. And this view cube is awfully handy. For example, if I wanted a plan view, I could just click on the top, and there it is. And this makes it very handy for when you're trying to crop away a very precise amount of the model. But otherwise, if you click on, say, a corner, you can orient the view. 45 degrees is pretty typical, but you can flatten it out if it works to advantage to show your project. In my case, I think I like that more traditional 45-degree angle. One thing that you will want to do, though, is don't leave it as the default 3D view, but come in and duplicate that 3D view so that you can return the original one to its original state. For this next view, which is called an exploded axonometric, I once again have duplicated that default 3D view so that I don't mess up the original. I have the section box activated here because I have a big model and I don't want to show all the site, but I'm going to hide that section box because I don't like it in this view. And then I'm going to select elements that I want to kind of pull apart. And in this case, I'm going to start with the roof. And up on the Modify toolbar, there is an option to displace the elements. And you can watch the little video, or you can watch me watching the video here on my video. And basically, you select the object you want to displace, and a gizmo shows up. And you can see how as I move my mouse over these different arrows, they allow me to drag it by clicking and dragging. It pulls apart your project in a very interesting way. By the way, this is only in this view. You're not actually moving the object. You're just moving it in this particular view. So I could displace these elements one by one. I can also group them so I can have multiple elements just by selecting multiple elements using the Control key. And these elements can be modified afterwards by just selecting them again, and they will the gizmo will reappear and you can change their position. You can also add elements to the group here that has been displaced. Just click the Edit toolbar, and you can click on other elements which you'd like to move out, and they will be joined proportionally, which is to say their dimensional relationship will remain the same, but they will be pulled off to the side of your project. You'll want to rotate the view so that you can make it the most interesting and really show off these elements. And of course, every project is going to have different parts that you're going to want to pull apart. So using that section box is very helpful to not show things that might make the drawing a little too confusing. You could even do this with furniture and ceilings, for example, and not entire building elements. Finally, you can add back in a path which shows the route that these elements took to get out of your project. Sometimes they're hard to find, like that back one would be nice to show. The front one I can show, but the back one I can't seem to get it. You could mouse around and try and find it. And these other elements, again, are kind of interesting to see. You can also do these sorts of adjustments in Photoshop. But there is your displaced view. The only other part that you need to worry about in this view is to make sure that the crop region isn't going to be giving you problems. Now, in my case, my crop region is set way out here. I just turned it on by clicking on the crop region button. So you're going to want to make sure that you pull it in nice and tight. And the reason that I bring it up is that it is endemic of this view that it often kind of zooms way out. So we want to make sure that you show your entire view. Otherwise, when you render, you will have an awful lot of white space, which is no fun at all. Now for this next view, which is called a section perspective, this is a view which you again start with the axonometric view, the sort of default 3D, or probably any one of your views. I have cropped away the building, and I really want to show the relationship of the spaces in the whole project. I can orient the view. I want to look in from the back side of the kitchen here. If you click on the name here, what it will do is it will orient the camera to that view. Now, I am in orthographic projection right now, which means that this is a true interior elevation, or actually a true section, which, by the way, if you wanted to render, you absolutely can, and you would end up with a nice rendered interior elevation or section. But I want this to be a section perspective, which is to say it's going to show the cut through the building, but it is also going to be in perspective. And this is a traditional architectural drawing. Well, the way to do that is you go to the View Properties here and choose Perspective and hit Apply. Now you can see I am still oriented to this left view. I am cutting through the building, but now it's in perspective. I'm seeing my vanishing points. And guess what? We can use all of our favorite tools. We can pan up and down. We can zoom in and out. I'm probably going to hide that section box because it's a little distracting. Now, just like our displacement view, you can sometimes run into problems with the crop region being set way too far out. And in fact, it may not even like it if you try to crop it down too much. If it sort of stops on you, click the Size Crop button, and you can come in and make your dimensions much larger. Again, I'm going to make this 12 inches just because I think I have some more cropping to do. Controlling this view is going to be very similar to the previous views in that you absolutely can look at it straight on. Again, I just clicked the left button. But maybe you want to orbit the model slightly in order to get a kind of interesting skewed view. And I often find that these are very interesting and dynamic views of your project. They really show you a lot of information. This is basically our discussion of 1 point versus 2 point, and the 2 point tends to be much more experiential. You'll also want to decide if you want to focus on one floor, or the other floor, or somewhere in between, and think about what you see. In this case, if I focus on the first floor, I don't really see much of the perspective in the second floor. I don't see much of the furniture. So it may be that I want to kind of make the horizon line right around the second floor level. I think that will give me the best view. The other thing that you can do here in your section perspective to kind of gussy it up, this is a section, and so we really want to see the poche. But of course, I'm not always a big fan of the blue poche. We can use our visibility and graphic overrides menu, just type in VG, and we can make all of the poche on the cut pattern much darker. And what you want to do is select any ceilings, walls, floors, even columns if you cut through those, and of course the roof, to select more than one, but that are not in the same, right on top of each other. Just hold down Control, and you see how that allows you to select more than one. And now I can click the override button on any one of these. Just click the override, and this is the cut pattern that I'm overriding here. And what this looks like is, first of all, you need to choose a pattern. I'm going to choose a solid fill, and then I'm going to override the color, and let's just go with black to make it as clear as possible where the cut region. And you can see here the effect that has on the section. This won't change the way it renders, but it does make it a lot easier to compose your drawing. So it's finally time to render this project and see what we have wrought with all these different views. Normally I would do a local render. I'd call up my render dialog box, and I would check to make sure that I have it set to something that's going to show off my project. And if you're doing your studio project, of course, you'll have a pretty good idea of how well it's going to render. And if you did use your studio project, I would certainly hope that you saved a copy and are working on a copy of it so you don't mess up your original file. But anyway, we are going to use the render cloud option here. We love the render cloud. It makes our lives so easy. And especially in this project where I can choose all the views I want to render all at once. I can just click on them all here in the dialog box here for the cloud render. And I'm just going to use the standard quality here just because, frankly, I'm impatient and I want to see the results as fast as possible. So just click render and it will let you know when it's done. And by the way, I'm going to go to my render gallery here. And here's my project. I'm going to view all the views. You can copy this web address and use it in any browser. So those of you who are using a Mac, for example, and you want to view your renderings, or even just an iPad, if you bookmark that into your browser, you'll be able to view those renderings in these other systems. That didn't take very long, did it? Well, I guess you wouldn't even know because you're all just fast forwarding in the video. But basically now you can check and make sure that these views look the way you expect. This exploded one, by the way, those dashed lines don't show up anymore. And what the render cloud does, as we all know, is it will adjust the lighting conditions to be as well balanced as possible. So if you don't like the shadows, for example, you can go back to Revit and change the time of day in order to get a different shadow. And for my axonometric view, you can see I have a lot of empty space here. And this is because my crop region was set too far out. So I would want to go back to Revit and reset that crop region. So like I did before, I turn on my crop region, make sure that the crop view button is clicked so that it is in fact cropping the view. Another thing that we can do is we can modify the sun here, and to see what the sun looks like, you can click the shadows on or off, and then if you go to where the sun path is, you go to the sun settings and it will tell you basically what the conditions are. Often it's just set to lighting, kind of in this current session, where you can just change the altitude and the azimuth relative to the view. But often you want to change it to a specific time of year. So for example, fall equinox, spring equinox, each of those can be very interesting views of your project. You can always make it nighttime also, which would turn off the lighting altogether. And here is my properly cropped axonometric view with the different sunlighting conditions. So now that we have found that these look really good, first of all, what we're going to want to do is re-render all of these at the highest quality setting. And you pretty much always want to use the highest quality setting. This is going to give you the sharpest image, the nicest lighting, and the ability to put it on a sheet of drawings in a much larger dimension. To do this, you could re-render individual drawings, but I want to re-render them all because that saves time. Just choose under Actions, Render All as Still Image. And what you can do here is you can control the quality setting. Let's make it Final, which is much higher quality, of course. And then make the dimension much larger. Now, you may not be able to get away with doing all of them. See how it says 108 credits are needed? So you may want to just choose some of the images and render them one by one or in a group. The other thing you can do once you're done re-rendering each one, and if you do run out of credits, by the way, sometimes the system just says you've done too much rendering, you can try deleting some renderings from some other projects. And you can also try to wait for everything to be completed, but a minimum of 2,000 pixels is ideal for our project. Anyway, the other thing you can do is come in and do some post-processing. We can, of course, do this in Photoshop, but we can do it right here on the web. The biggest thing is to change the saturation. Sometimes the colors can be a bit bold. I really don't care about colors in this project, so I'm just going to drag it right down to 0 to make it black and white. You can also modify the exposure value if it was a little dark. And the other thing you can play with is this feature called Bloom, which really most people don't like, but it will kind of create a little fuzziness. Sometimes this works really well with a lot of electric lighting. You can get kind of an interesting effect, but I think I'm going to leave it off for my project. And each of these, you should make them black and white. Finally, if you want to download all of your projects, all of your image renderings, just choose under Actions, Download All. What I'm probably going to have to do, I think I've run out of credits here, I'm going to have to download the 4 that I have rendered at high quality, and then I'll delete those from the project and render the other 4 at high quality and then call it a day. So I have downloaded all of my files. It comes in, when you do it this way, as a giant zip file, which you need to extract if you are on a PC. Just click Extract All, and it'll put them in a folder for you. So we need to get all of these great renderings into a presentation. And as you are probably well aware, we can't do a single board presentation like we normally would do. So we are stuck with a linear presentation. And in this case, PowerPoint is actually pretty handy. What you can do, if you go to the Insert menu on a new PowerPoint slideshow, you can insert a new photo album. This is a really quick way to generate a presentation. And you can just click on the File/Disk button, browse for your files, select them all, and click Insert. And I usually leave it as set to Fit to Slide. If you choose one of these other options, it will often make your image a little smaller. And this is especially true if you put a title in. You can see the little preview here with the title. So I'm just going to go with the Fit to Slide option. You could also make them all black and white if they weren't already. But when you click Create, they'll make a nice little slideshow for you. And here's that beautiful slideshow. Each slide has a individual image on it. You can come in here and do any number of things, including change the background to be white if you don't like the white background, or make it gray if you prefer. Also, I brought these images in. I just left the background color on. Some of you may prefer to export the images from Revit without that background, and I think they will show up a lot more nicely. Of course, you're not done yet. You do need to do things like have titles on these slides. You can just go to Insert and put in some kind of text box that explains what we're looking at. And of course, you'll probably want to be consistent from drawing to drawing. But whatever the view is, type in your titles there and explain what we're looking at. And the big thing here, by the way, if you are presenting, you might want to give yourself some notes. So for example, I'm going to want to know for all of you, what is it that makes this drawing interesting and a unique view of your project? What do you see that's different? Well, you can type in here that this is an overview or something like that. And this is great because as you're making your presentation, I'm going to ask you to record it, and these notes will come in very handy because I think a lot of you aren't used to presenting from a PowerPoint slideshow where you're kind of under time limitation. So for each of these slides, I'd like you to add in a title. This one's a little small for my taste. Let's make it a little bigger here. And of course, you can format these things as you wish. PowerPoint does this kind of annoying thing where it offers you options for kind of ready-made views. Some of these can be nice. Some of these can be absolutely ridiculous. So you might do better to just design it yourself. But also, of course, have on your title slide the name of this project and the name of the building that you are using for your project so that I know what it is. The other thing that I need you to do is to record narration for this particular project. I think this would be a lot more helpful for us, for me, because some of you don't have the snappiest internet connection, and this way I can collect all of your projects and I can play them for everyone else, because I know that my internet connection, at least where I'm sitting right now, is pretty good. So anyway, what you'll want to do is go to the slideshow tab and make sure that this use presenter view is checked, so that if you do have notes for yourself, those notes will show up as you are presenting. But then you'll just want to go over here to where it says record slideshow. Obviously, I'm in the middle of this thing, so I would want to record from the beginning. And the advantage here is when you are in slideshow mode, you see how it shows you the slide that you are viewing, but it also gives you the amount of time that you have been talking. I just have to click the record button. It will give me a little countdown. And then I can go in here and begin talking. And you can just use the arrow keys to advance in your slides. It's telling you how long that you've been talking. And you can click up here to see your notes. And this is really handy because I won't see them in the recording, but you will see them so that you are able to prepare your presentation in a clear way without kind of stumbling over your words, kind of like I'm doing right now. Anyway, I would ask that your presentations not be any longer than about 6 minutes. And for each slide, just briefly explain what you see is different about the way this type of view represents your project. Perhaps there's something unique about the tall proportion or the wide proportion that doesn't show up or isn't apparent in the other views. And that is basically our composition project. So once you are done with your recording, you can just hit stop and it will save it into your file. And I just hit escape to go back to my slideshow. And if you look on the lower right of your slide, you see there's a little preview button. And in fact, you can even re-record individual slides just by deleting that little element there, that little icon. If you want to make other changes, such as having the slides fade from one to the next, maybe make it a nice kind of dramatic fade, That can be a very pleasant and softening kind of effect, but of course you'll have to re-record over your slide, or at least it may interfere with the narration. Anyway, you can just save this file for me. Just click the Save button. One option, though, if you are interested, is you can save and actually export this image, this slideshow, as a video file. And this can be very handy for a number of things. You typically do want to use the recorded timings and narrations. And what this will basically do is just export your slide as a single movie file. This can, for our purposes, PowerPoint is just fine because I can just hit play. However, if you want to upload your presentation to something else, Yuja, if you are on Canvas, or if you want to upload to YouTube, you will need to turn it into a movie file. And by the way, the file dimension, the pixel dimension, is going to be based on kind of the default value for PowerPoint. This is 1920 by 1080. It is convenient to do this dimension because I exported all of my renderings at 2000 pixels wide, and this will get me the highest quality video. So try to put together this project piece by piece and put together a little presentation for the class.